After being found in a garbage, a 1,700-year-old sock was discovered. Specialists are now discovering its vivid mysteries. Egypt's ancient civilizations left behind many amazing artifacts, but during an excavation in the early 20th century near Antinopolis, something extraordinarily amazing was found: a sock. Granted, a typical accessory like this one might not seem like a very interesting discovery, but its fibers have an incredible narrative to tell, and it was discovered to be 1,700 years old. According to traditional Egyptian chronology, ancient Egyptian civilization began at 3,100 BC. The Egyptians continued to make the most of their resources to increase their population and enhance their way of life from that point on until the conclusion of this chapter in the nation's history, which occurred in 646 BC. For instance, the Egyptians started taking use of the Nile River's regular floods. They created an abundance of crops by devising methods for directing floods and irrigating farms. As a result, more people were able to proliferate and develop, creating a rich and distinctive culture of their own. Regarding clothing, Egyptians were also innovators. One thing, though, never changed. They used the materials and resources they could find around to make garments. Because of this, pastoral nomads usually wore animal skin clothing. However, the Egyptians wore linen in regions that were mostly agricultural. The Egyptians would soak the flax after it was grown until it was soft enough to break into fibers. They turned the strands into threads so they could weave and make fabric. Both sexes used the resulting materials to create uniquely tailored ensembles. Men wore skirts in ancient Egypt. They fastened them with belts, encircling them around their waists. Men started wearing shorter, longer, and even pleated skirts as a result of changing fashion trends. Wealthy men exhibited even more style. They covered their skirts with headpieces, jewels, and textile decorations. Women also wore plain clothing in a same manner. Their clothing was long and skimmed the floor with one or two straps. With time, they also developed a more imaginative style for dressing, draping pleated fabric to produce more elaborate looks. Additionally, rich ladies accessorized much as their male counterparts did. Both historically and currently, Egyptians regarded jewelry as a status symbol. Items crafted from more valuable materials demonstrated the wearer's status and riches. Wearing bracelets, necklaces, earrings, collars, pendants, and rings would not only make an impression on their neighbors, but also on their gods. The most astonishing revelation of all may be that the ancient Egyptians even made their own cosmetics. With black coal liner, both sexes emphasized their eyes. The green and blue hues of their eyelids were altered by the powdered minerals. Furthermore, they also depended on henna to dye their nails and lips. Ancient Egyptians usually wore bare feet, despite their evident love of jewelry and cosmetics. If they had an important occasion to attend or an activity scheduled that would injure their feet, they put on sandals. Additionally, they occasionally made the mistake that would be considered a fashion faux pas today. Yep, they wore socks with their sandals. The Egyptians adopted the wearing of knitted wool socks somewhere between the 3rd and 6th century AD. To accommodate sandals, they usually had a space between the first 2 and the final 3 toes. The Romans of antiquity wore socks as well, particularly when they ventured outside of their warm, humid Mediterranean homeland. Though it would be nearly a century after its original discovery, it would be an ancient Egyptian sock that would make historians take notice. It was discovered by a guy named John de Monans Johnson. He researched the writings of the Egyptians, from literature to legal transactions that had been preserved in papyrus as part of his work in papyrology. Thus, de Monans Johnson oversaw an excavation of the city of Antinopolis between 1913 and 1914. In AD 130, the city was established by the Greek Emperor Hadrian as a memorial to his friend Antinous, who had drowned in the Nile River. Johnson intended to uncover any remaining papyrus concealed there, even after all these centuries. In the end, the papyrus-filled dig provided him with precisely what he was looking for. Indeed, Johnson was able to locate enough papyri to compile Antinopolis Papyri, a 3-part compilation published in the 1950s and 60s. However, he discovered many more fascinating objects on top of the papyrus during his search for written fragments. Johnson also found linens, lamps, coins, shoes, and even a wooden clapper in addition to the papyri. It is said that when he and other specialists first found these artifacts, they were not particularly interested in them. However, in 2018, fresh study revealed the fascinating potential of textiles, more precisely, an ancient Egyptian sock. Eventually, the sock made its way to the British Museum in London, where it was housed as a piece of the Antinopolis collection. In 2018, specialists were able to determine how old the clothing was. The wool sock was woven in around 300 AD, meaning it was created more than 1,700 years ago. In 2018, new technology made it possible for the in-house scientific team at the British Museum to discover more about the sock. This was due to the fact that they had the choice of employing multispectral imaging, which gathers information from many wavelengths utilizing the electromagnetic spectrum and reveals additional information that is invisible to the human eye, to identify the kinds of dye that were used to paint the multicolored sock. The scientists employed multispectral imaging. It should come as no surprise that the ancient Egyptians colored their woolen garments using only natural plant-based dyes. For example, they utilized the root of madder to make a red color. Madder is still used for that purpose today. Additionally, the Egyptians had found that the woad plant could be used to color garments blue. Woad is becoming less popular these days in favor of synthetic substitutes. Lastly, they employed the weld plant to produce yellow pigment, a technique they shared with the Romans, who frequently utilized weld to create bridal gowns with vibrant colors. Furthermore, multispectral imaging showed the experts at the British Museum exactly how the Egyptians had dipped threads in dye to produce various hues. They could observe how the ancient civilization's complex weaving processes produced such a rainbow appearance, which was remarkable given the 3 dyes they employed. Amazingly, the museum staff managed to accomplish all of this without jeopardizing the traditional sock. Previously, they would have had to cut a piece from the garment for radiocarbon dating and analysis of the sock's colorful dyes. Instead, multispectral imaging gave them a clearer look at the technique and dyes without inflicting any damage. Scientist Dr. Joanne Dyer came up with a unique method of analysis while on the job in the British Museum's Department of Scientific Research. She told The Guardian, "It was exciting to find that the different colored stripes found on the child's sock were created using a combination of just 3 natural dyes." Dyer and the rest of the team shared their findings in a journal called PLOS One, where they further described the garment's unique shading and weaving. The Egyptians had produced orange, purple, and green in addition to the main hues using their plant-based red, yellow, and blue dyes. The colorful outfit was finished using special weaving and dyeing procedures, as Dyer later disclosed. She said that the Egyptians had combined many monochromatic strands to form a single hue in some areas. In some, they repeatedly dyed a single strand after dipping it into several colors until they had the desired color. The purpose of the sock and the special knitting method that was employed to put it together may both be explained by the British Museum. This sock was made for a child's left foot, where the big toe was separated from the other 4 toes. It probably fit in with the sock and sandal fashion of the day. The Egyptians' distinctive knitting technique allowed them to create such an aperture. They were able to stitch each toe separately by using a single needle looping technique, commonly known as nail binding, which gave them enough space between the fingers to suit a sandal, despite the fact that the knitter used dark green yarn to create each toe. They then joined and worked in bands of orange, purple, bluish-green, dark red, and green, working in orange for 6 rows and green for 6 rows. The design on the heel, according to the scientist, was colorful and included hints of yellow and dark blue. Naturally, the study provided further information on the clothing to the public. Not only was Dr. Dyer's imaging technique less expensive and time-consuming than previous methods of analyzing ancient materials, it also preserved the integrity of the sock. Previously, you would have to take a small piece of material from different areas, and this sock is from 300 AD, she said to The Guardian. Dyer said, "You would have to physically destroy part of this object because it is tiny and fragile. However, you have a fairly decent idea of what they may be using multispectral photography in addition to other methods. She came to the conclusion that, naturally, the experts at the British Museum could examine the sock's colors and manufacturing technique in greater detail now that it was intact. However, they could also propose a theory on why it was created in the first place. The 1300-year-old sock's creation occurred during a time in Egyptian history, which may help to further explain its inventiveness. The ancient Egyptians had their own religion long before the sock appeared on the scene, and they worshipped several gods under its authority. They felt that everything in their lives was under the control of their gods. To gain their favor, they therefore frequently prayed and left sacrifices. Furthermore, it was believed that the pharaohs who governed ancient Egypt served as a conduit between the populace and their gods. They therefore carried out such rites and tributes on a regular basis. The state even allocated substantial funds to support these rituals and the numerous temples where the populace paid homage to their deities. However, Egypt went through a period of continuous instability in the early to mid-600s as a result of several empires invading and conquering their nation and bringing other faiths with them. Egypt had long been a part of the Christian-promoting Byzantine Empire. But between 639 and 646, the Rashidun Caliphate introduced Islam to Egypt. The capture of Antinopolis by the Muslims in AD 641 means that the sock was likely crocheted at a period of intense turmoil and unpredictability. Thus, the clothing symbolized the kind of resources available to the citizens of the city in the midst of yet another conflict over Egyptian land. According to Dyer's description provided to The Guardian, a lot is happening in Egypt right now. The Romans left Egypt once the Arabs conquered it. The technical characteristics of the clothing that people were wearing and the methods used to create these things are all impacted by these events in terms of commerce, economics, and material availability. Thus, the sock's vibrant portions, which were made with just 3 different dyes, served as a memento and remembrance of this turbulent period. We may hypothesize that maybe the people's access to resources was limited, forcing them to become as inventive as they were with their double-dipping and thread-weaving methods. Larger-scale study into the creation of other ancient artifacts will be prompted by the British Museum's success with multispectral imaging, which will uncover comparable realities about other historical objects. It implies we may examine a greater number and diversity of items, according to Dyer. Relationships between a greater number of things and various time periods are seen. Other researchers have already employed multispectral photography with their ancient relics, having been successful in doing so with the sock by the British Museum team. For instance, in March 2019, Professor Gregory Hayworth and his students at the University of Rochester utilized this method to find what may be a buried text on a Torah. The Torah they reviewed appeared to have been written considerably later than the ancient Egyptian sock, roughly 1900 AD, according to their suspicions. But there was a fascinating tale to the scroll. The Jewish communities in Moravia and Bohemia were forced to surrender their holy texts and artifacts during the Nazi invasion in 1939. Their Torah could have originated from a vanished congregation, which only Hayworth and his pupils would be able to locate by figuring out the cryptic signs. And multispectral imaging proved useful in this situation. Hayworth and his pupils thrived on obtaining what they had sought, despite the demanding nature of the labor, as he informed the university's news center. The Torah scroll, then, had a tale to tell, just like the ancient Egyptian sock. It only required the appropriate individuals to attempt to unearth its reality.